sponsors. Okay. Assume. So improving, uses this beautiful space that we get to use, Securus Academy, Akotis, and Scrum. And then my fellow organizers, so none of them are in the room. Dan might be online, I'm not sure. But we have Gary and Lisa are here, Dan, Thor, and Tosin as well. And then just curious, does anyone have any like community announcements that they wanted to mention or job opportunities or anything like that before we get started? You don't have one, Jonathan? No, not yet. Okay. Oh, that's right. You don't. Okay. Well, one that I'm aware of, Agile Open Canada, is in Victoria this year, and it's May 27th, 28th, I think. So I don't think registration or anything's open, but save the date for that if you're interested in that type of thing. Jonathan used to work on the organizing team there, so that's why I thought. Okay. So really excited to have Lucas here with us, and he's going to be speaking about Agile at AWS. And so with this, I'll pass it over to you.
Sounds good.
Thanks.
Okay, yeah, I'm Lucas Tatro. I'm a senior software engineer at Amazon, or AWS specifically. I work in the IAM Identity Center service, and I've been with that team for about a year. I'm going to start with a disclaimer. There we go. So I'm not speaking on behalf of Amazon. This isn't meant to be an authoritative overview of Agile at Amazon or AWS. I'll be speaking about my own views and experiences, so on and so forth. If I didn't say that, I'd have to get like training internally and so on. So this was easier. Okay. So this is the agenda. I want to cover, well, just an introduction to myself. We'll talk about if AWS is Agile, and my take is maybe. And then I want to walk you through the annual planning cycle, how that rolls into our two-piece of team model, how we make sure things are going well with mechanisms like business reviews, and then just a general overview of high-level mechanisms at AWS. So I've been writing software professionally since about 2011, and a lot longer than that if you count GeoCities websites. But yeah, I started my career at Farm Credit Canada in probably the least agile environment imaginable. Matrix-based organization, development teams working on different languages, sat apart from each other. I only saw business analysts like, when they had a requirement doc for me, that type of thing. And I spent about 10 years at Farm Credit and went through basically an agile transformation. I was on the initial pilot project team, so we actually sat together, like business analysts and developers can be friends, believe it or not. I'm the only one, actually, that's my wife in the front row. We didn't work together back then. But yeah, so that I learned a ton about Agile. That was kind of my first introduction, and then seeing the transformation over time. When I left, Farm Credit had gone from a small pilot team to the entire development org sort of transitioned over to running sprints and doing Scrum. And there's been a lot of work since then. I don't know if Thor's on the call, but he's been at FCC as a consultant for a while as well. So after FCC, I did a very short stint as a consultant with ThoughtWorks. They're mostly based out of the US, but they have some presence in Toronto and Vancouver. So I was flying into Vancouver from Regina every week, and it felt like I was at summer camp, Agile summer camp. Like it was just, these people live and breathe extreme programming. We pair programmed 100% of the time. We had monitors with like APIs and dashboards hanging over our pods. It was just super cool. But yeah, very short stint there. Then I joined a startup called Vivo. I spent about 3 years there, and it was so small that the first day on the job, I got there before everybody except the HR person, and she didn't know I'd been hired. So I had to tell her who I was. And then at 10 o'clock that morning, we had a meeting with the government of Saskatchewan, and I was introduced as the lead architect of this project that we ended up shipping about 4 months later. So yeah. Oh, and then AWS, of course, this is why you're here. So I moved to Vancouver and joined AWS in September of 2020 amidst the pandemic as a software development manager. I was leading 3 teams. Well, it started as 1. I grew it to 3 teams with the Amazon MQ offering. So running message brokers as a service. If you don't know like what they are, what message brokers are, they're kind of like databases, but less persistent, if you will. Anyhow, so I got to experience the whole planning cycle for 2 years as I managed those teams. I got to learn how to grow a team, how to get funding for headcounts and propose new projects and so on. And then I realized I missed development. So I went back to a SDE role with Identity Center. And I've been there about a year. And so I probably spend maybe 15 to 20% of my time actually writing code. So I didn't get quite the change I wanted, but you know. Okay. Oh, if anybody scanned the first QR code, I promise this one's real. It's not another Rickroll. So, so that's a link to the Amazon leadership principles. So is AWS Agile? Maybe. Traditionally, you know, it's not a company that people talk about. You know, if you read books on Agile, they don't cite Amazon as, you know, the Agile poster child. But there are a lot of things that Agile or that Amazon does that are Agile or lead us to be Agile, behave Agile. And the leadership principles are one of those ways. So the very first leadership principle is customer obsession. And it reads, leaders start with the customer and work backwards. They work vigorously to earn and keep customer trust. Although leaders pay attention to competitors, they obsess over customers. Okay, as I was thinking about is AWS Agile, I was kind of like, okay, I don't really know what the true definition of Agile is anymore. It's changed over time. You know, when I started, this is what I learned about extreme programming, the Agile Manifesto, things like that. I'm still in love with extreme programming, although I'll admit that some of the practices are kind of dated and some have just become like table stakes. And the Agile Manifesto, I think it's a great starting spot, but it's really hard to describe a company like AWS in, you know, 4 simple sentences. So, so of course I asked ChatGPT, and this is what I came up with. And I actually thought it was a pretty good overview. So Agile is a bunch of practices. I can't read it here. Set of practices and principles that emphasize flexibility, collaboration, and customer feedback, and iterative development. So these are some of those practices: Agile methodologies, cross-functional teams, iterative development, continuous feedback, and so on. I won't read all this. But I think this actually, you know, aligns with kind of how I think about Agile. So we'll circle back to this at the end and just kind of compare what we cover to this list. And I think it's actually a pretty good coverage. Okay, so the first thing I want to cover is just the annual planning cycle. And so we'll go over 3YP, OP1, OP2, and goals. And I'll explain what those are. So 3YP is 3-year plan, OP1, operational planning 1, and then of course, operational planning 2, and goals is not an acronym. Okay, so Amazon really loves writing documents. Everything that we do comes in the form of either a one-page document or a 6-page document, including our 3-year plan. So this is a document that's meant to inspire the team, give them a chance to think long-term, beyond, you know, the fires you're fighting today or kind of the tactical projects you're solving for customers tomorrow. Really give you the opportunity to think like, what do I want to be when I grow up? And, you know, what could this service be, or a product or feature, whatever it is, right? So this document is going to cover things like the mission statement, and that states who you are, what you do, and for whom. And generally, we say that those should fit on a t-shirt, right? It'll cover your vision, and this is like your elevator pitch. Focus on the future, paints the picture of where you want to be. And then there's a section about your customer. Who are they? What do they like about your offering? What do they not? What are their pain points? And what problems are they currently experiencing that you think you can solve? We write these documents in Q2 of the year. And generally this is going to be our like senior leaders. So senior software development managers, directors, principal engineers, that type of thing. So after you've written your 3-year plan, you got to get back to, okay, what are we doing in the next year? So OP1 and OP2 happen at different times of year. OP1 is late Q2, early Q3, and then OP2 is in Q4. OP1 follows this structure, and you're writing your plan for the next 18 months. So including, the rest of the year and then the next calendar year sort of thing. The result of this is not, a rigid plan that you have to follow. But the intention is that, this is the work you're going to get done. In my experience, there are teams that are doing really good work throughout the year, investing in the right things. They've got happy customers and they ship almost none of their OP1 plan because things change and we react to change. And that's okay, right? So we don't measure against this in terms of performance. So OP1, you write this document, again, 6-page document. You answer questions that I think are pretty interesting and I haven't really seen elsewhere, like what dogs are not barking. So this would be something that like maybe your customers aren't complaining about it, maybe your team doesn't get woken up at night over it, that type of thing. But these are things that you're worried are going to become problems for you or for your customers, in the next 18 months. And then paper cuts. What are your top paper cuts? Often we ignore these, little bugs or glitches or issues with the service, but they add up to a poor customer experience, right? So if you're never thinking about your customer experience in aggregate, you're gonna have unhappy customers because one customer is gonna be frustrated about all 10 of those, right? So yeah, we're always trying to talk about that. So OP2, you just update the document. It's pretty easy. But OP2 is when you actually take the headcount that you were allocated. Hopefully you've hired those people by now. You've got your team kind of ready to go. And you've learned a few things. Maybe you've done some design and you can update your estimates, really plan out your roadmap for the year. That's the intention of OP2. So these are standard across Amazon. I think the 3-year plan, OP1, OP2, are pretty much the only like standard processes that we follow. Other than that, it's pretty well up to the teams. Yeah, okay. Okay, so you've written your 3-year plan, you went through OP1, OP2, it's Christmas time, it's time to start writing goals for next year. So we have 3 levels of goals. We have S-team goals. S-team is our senior team. So these are like Andy Jassy, the CEO of Amazon, and his VPs and so on. These goals have to have sponsorship from one of those folks, and they're generally ones that span multiple organizations. S-team goals are things that really move the business forward, whether it's like brand new services or a product offering that's going to bring in a lot of new income or something like that. But these are goals that they'll move the earth for, sort of thing. So if you are reporting that you're going to be late on the goal, they'll throw headcount your way. If you need money to buy more servers, they'll buy you servers, whatever, right? They'll delay other projects. S-team goals very rarely do not get met. That was an awkward way of saying that, but anyways. And then you have AWS goals. So these are the ones that are important to your organization. So I work in IAM Identity Center. My organization is AWS Identity. And so our AWS goals would be things that span Identity Center, Cognito. There's a few other services that I can't think of off the top of my head. These ones are sponsored by directors or general managers. And they get a lot of introspection at that organization level. But we will drop them if an S-team goal is at risk, sort of thing. And then there's team goals. And this is literally just like your Scrum team or 2-pizza team, as we call them, taking a goal. And it could be things like we want to reduce the number of high severity tickets that we get to, X% or whatever. Things that matter to you that, might not get prioritized at the senior leadership level. And this is how we write goals. This is an example of the format if you're writing a goal to reduce, or I think it's increase something by a certain percentage. Amazon really loves its acronyms. And so a lot of internal stuff is written this way. I don't know if other folks have ran into this, but this is new to me. And it's almost like reading another language sometimes. So in full year 2012, we produced 200 units of donkey feed worldwide. Year to date, so on. So the gist of it though is that these are SMART goals, right? They're specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. And then we try to express them in, 1 to 3 sentences sort of thing. Yeah. These goals get locked in at a certain point and you cannot change them. So if you take a goal to say, I want to increase, EC2 utilization by 90%, and then halfway through the year, you're like, man, we're never going to hit that. You can't drop that to 50 and say you achieve your goal. Like it's, you got to hit it. There's no wiggle room. Okay.
People then lower their goals as a result.
I think there's a little bit of that, right? But there's a big push always to kind of have stretch goals that push the team, right? If it's something like if you achieve 100% of your goals in a year, that's a red flag, right? Like generally you expect to miss a couple goals. So I think there's a healthy balance, right? You got to have a couple goals that you can bang out of the park and have a little party for. But you should have some stretch goals too, for sure. Yeah. Okay, I skipped the whole thing about how you influence those processes. So, people get in a room, they write a document, great, but who comes up with the ideas and decides what goes in those documents? Well, we write more documents. So narratives and PRFAQs are both 6-page documents, just slightly different formats. Narratives, we write for absolutely everything. If it's a small architecture decision, we'll write a 1-page document. They are on a site called Quip, or they get exported to our wiki, so they live for all time. You can go back and say, yeah, Lucas made this bad decision, sort of thing, and it was approved by Bob and Fred. But yeah, anyways, every meeting starts, not every meeting, most meetings start with a document read. So somebody will send out the document, and you spend the first 5 to 30 minutes reading silently, which is super awkward if you've never done that before. But it's beautiful because you never join a meeting and someone goes, oh, sorry, I didn't read the doc. Can you guys catch me up? Right? Like that is the worst experience in a meeting, and everyone's been there. And I've been that guy too, so don't get me wrong. But the philosophy is like time doesn't come from nowhere. So if you want me to read a document, like book a meeting and I'll read the document, right? And then we'll discuss. The 1 page and 6 pages, the idea is this is what you can read and discuss in 30 or 60 minutes. The 6-page documents are often a stretch, especially if you get appendix happy. The rule is like you can have as many appendices as you want. So sometimes someone will say, here's my 6-page doc, and it's 70 pages long. And you try to get through as much as you can in 30 minutes, and then you start discussing. The PRFAQ is just a twist on the narrative. So the big thing is it's a press release and frequently asked questions. If you're building a new service, launching a new product, you have to write a PRFAQ. This goes all the way up to Andy Jassy for approval before you basically get funded to build a new service. This is a great tool for working backwards from the customer, right? So the press release, we write a mock press release. It never gets released. We even do things like we write fake quotes from our VPs or from our customers about what they really enjoyed about the feature launch or the product offering. So we're really trying to describe the experience and understand it from the customer's perspective. And then the FAQ is always interesting. The FAQ gets updated the entire life of the project. So you started off with these kind of 40 standard questions that we have. And then as you have frequently asked questions, you add them to the list and it grows. But there's some interesting ones there, like what will customers be most disappointed in, for example, which is something you don't usually talk about with a new feature or service. But it raises those things like, hey, we cut this, this feature so that we can hit a date. But if your customers are going to hate that, well, move the date, right? Like, let's have that conversation. if they're going to be disappointed because we can't build something because there's a technical limitation, well, then let's write the PRFAQ for that so that we can fix that technical limitation first, right? And so now we've got prioritization built into a simple 6-page document. It's pretty cool.
J'étais en train de suivre un webinaire.
I didn't
Tout petit
understand.
tiens.
Did anybody catch that?
Accidental off muted.
Okay. All right. If someone's speaking, you're not muted.
Don, you got a question online?
I do. I was just wondering, so if you start with your PRFAQ at the beginning of a new product, is it, you mentioned the FAQs are constantly being updated because you're starting from a place of assumptions of what that's going to be like for your customer. Does that, you may intend to touch on this, but does that mean throughout your agile processes, you're continually gathering that feedback to see how close to the mark you were all along the way and make adjustments?
Yeah, totally. And I wasn't going to cover it very much, so it's a good question. One of the questions is, what feedback have you collected so far? So the intention is, if you're writing this doc, hopefully you've interviewed some customers and you know what you're doing. But yeah, I mean, we do meet with customers regularly. We have armies of solution architects and product managers and so on. And these people talk to customers every single day of their lives. And then when we're building a new service, we have different gates before we get to production. So it might be a private beta, an open beta. It could be different types of releases that we do to gather feedback before we ship the product. And quite often we're building for some key customers, right? So an example I'll give you, I built a cross-region replication product for ActiveMQ. And we had basically 3 key customers that said, hey, we did this ourselves with our own data centers and it sucked. And we want to move to Amazon, but we can't be in a single region. So can you build this for us? And so we started with those 3 customers and we built a service around it because it turns out, they're not the only ones who wanted this stuff. So I think I gave you a very hand-wavy answer, but yes, we talk to customers and we continue to gather feedback on this stuff.
Question.
Sure.
After you've done all this, you mentioned about prioritization. Do you have some internally developed framework that you use, or curious how you prioritize all of these against each other?
For prioritization?
Yeah. We talk about prioritization frameworks like RICE and WSJF.
No one talks about frameworks at Amazon. So everything is just like, there's so little influence from whatever the rest of the industry is doing in terms of development and agile and whatever. It's just the peculiar ways that Amazon runs its business. So I couldn't speak to how those features and products that we're trying to fund get prioritized. That's senior leadership. They go off in a room and they make bets, I guess, right? I don't know. But in terms of the team, it's a very bottoms up model. So I think, no, I don't. So basically, when you're writing your OP1 document, your whole development team's involved, at least at the brainstorming level, and then you kind of get the more senior people in the nitty-gritty details. But all the projects that are proposed at the team level come from the team themselves. There might be some top-down campaign security related things that come in, but those just kind of get their own bucket, and we keep our work separate. So that really comes down to these narratives, having the conversations about, if we do this, like which customers are going to grow, which ones aren't. So I don't think there's a very rigid framework. A lot of it comes down to just discussing and trade-offs, right? And it's always with limited resources, right? So you have only so many people. So you put it in a list and you stack rank it, and that's what you get done.
Sounds familiar. Okay.
Okay. So did your 3-year plan, OP1, OP2, you got some goals, and now you need to get the work done. So now we got to talk about 2 pizza teams. 2 pizza teams are literally a team that can be fed by 2 pizzas. So not enough. I think we had 5 or 6 pizzas out there today. So the 2 pizza team is an interesting model It's meant to be single-threaded ownership over a specific product or service. For large services like IAM Identity Center, that can mean single microservice when we have 50 of them, sort of thing. Or it could mean a few of them, or it could mean an entire service, right? So the team I owned before, Amazon MQ, we had a single team who built and operated the ActiveMQ offering, right? And so they supported 50,000 EC2 instances and 10,000 customers with about 9 people, right? And that's how it works all across Amazon. It's basically 2,000 or more tiny little startups who are just very, very well funded, basically. They, unlike traditional IT organizations, they never hand their software off. So you don't do a project and then move on to the next thing and forget about what you built. You don't give it to a support engineer to answer calls about it, and you don't let somebody else deploy your software. So we write the OP1 docs, we write the goals, we build the software, we ship it, and my pager might go off, if something goes wrong. So the ownership is that is intentional to build ownership. If you get woken up at 3 in the morning enough times, you're going to fix the bug that causes that, or you're going to yell really loud to get it fixed, right? If you've got another team who supports your product and you don't have to prioritize that work because you know that Joe's going to get paged on me, then you're going to continue working on feature development while your product runs. And that's really the intention of keeping people close to the software that they're building, really understanding it, understanding the customers. So developers on the team will end up on customer calls for high severity issues. They get paged 24 hours a day, sort of thing, on-call rotation, all that good stuff. There's a huge risk of duplication and siloed development. So there's a ton of work that goes into frameworks in terms of programming language. So we have a system called Coral that does all the request handling. We've got logging libraries, and there's just a bunch of standard things that you need to do when you build your service. And that if enough teams end up doing it, then that'll get shifted off to another team, and you'll have a 2-pizza team dedicated to the logging library that we all use, right? And that's really important. But I'll give you a concrete example of duplicate development. So IAM Identity Center, we do standards-based identity federation using OIDC. My team owns outbound OIDC for IAM Identity Center. So we write access tokens, refresh tokens. I don't know if anyone's familiar with the stuff, but we do outbound OIDC. We've got another team that owns inbound OIDC. It's the same specification, it's the same JOTs and so on, but we have our own code bases and they don't overlap. We don't share code, and we've talked about it lots. Like maybe we should just develop some shared libraries, but then who would own them? That would get awkward if there's a bug. And then there's also Cognito, which is also under AWS Identity, but more customer facing. And they have the same thing. They have 2 teams who own inbound and outbound OIDC. And then there's AWS IAM, which is the standard identity offering, and they have OIDC as well. So we have, at least that I know of, at least 6 teams who own OIDC standards compliant services, writing very similar code, having the same bugs, and we do very little collaboration, unfortunately. But that's the way it is. Okay, so the development process, I'll just kind of walk through. So a goal hits the team. We've got to build X. First thing we're going to do is assign it to a developer, probably a mid or senior developer, and they're going to write a high-level design. And this high-level design is an overview of our architecture, what changes are necessary, what are the APIs that we need, and what are the success benchmarks. So what are the metrics we need to publish and monitor and things like that. And these get reviewed and approved by principal engineers. Once you have a high-level design, and you might have, for a large project, you might have many of them, right? Once you have a high-level design, you're going to break it down into 1 or more low-level designs. And this covers everything from detailed API design, like the names of parameters and HTTP methods. You'll write flow diagrams showing every database call, every asynchronous request, and so on. And yeah, so down to the very nitty-gritty details. And then once you've got your low-level design approved, usually by a senior engineer on the team, you can start writing your stories, put them in your backlog, and people can start working on them. Great. That sounds really like big upfront design, really waterfall, but it ends up being very iterative. It's really, really hard to design stuff up front. So you end up playing and implementing a little bit and then coming back and updating your high level design. And then that goes, oh, right, I have to add this parameter to my low level design. So often it's one person kind of like flowing through this all at the same time. And so when we wrap up the high level design, low level design, that all happens pretty close together. And we've usually got almost working software by then. We rely really heavily on continuous integration and continuous delivery, CI/CD. I have a statistic. So far this year, this calendar year, I have submitted 402 pull requests, like code changes, 53,848 lines added, 26,496 lines removed on 37 different packages. That's a lot. And every single one of those was in production for customers within 2 to 3 days. It's an automated process. There's no, well, again, in my experience, most teams don't have this. There's no manual intervention. There's no manual testing. I write my code. I write my unit tests. I write my intake tests. I write my canaries. I write monitors, and then I publish it. And it goes to production. So we have staging environments called alpha, beta, gamma. Every one of those runs the intake tests. Runs canaries. We bake in those regions for, in the early ones, 30 minutes, in the later ones, 2 hours. And then it's in front of customers. And sort of, it's in production, it may be hit, but it's often behind feature flags or allow lists or some kind of IP gating or whatever. So, but the goal is that we always have working compilable code, right? We always have pipelines that can ship software to our customers, and they're constantly deploying so that you don't have one big massive change like at the end of your year-long project, or at reInvent, if anybody knows about the conference in a week or so. We don't want to ship a huge amount of software then. Question?
So now that everything is isolated in different teams, like OIDC is run 6 teams, do AWS use the same programming language? Do you guys have guidelines, or every team is free kind of like?
So in theory, a 2-pizza team could say, we're gonna write our stuff in, whatever, C# or any language they want. In practice, it would be very difficult to just decide that you're gonna do that. And it's the stuff I was talking about, like the libraries and things that we have, frameworks that are implementing all the best practices that Amazon has learned over the last 25 years. It'd be really hard to replicate that and ship software of the quality that we expect, with all the lessons learned built in another language. So I don't know what the numbers are, but the vast majority of teams write in Java. And then, oh my God, what's the other language? It's not Go. Sorry?
Do you use Kotlin?
There's some Kotlin. No, it's what's the memory safe language? Rust. I don't know what's that. Okay. Yes, Rust. Rust is becoming very popular for high performance stuff now. So there's teams building in that. And there's getting to be more support for, like basic things, like I keep coming back to logging, but logging gets really difficult when you're, operating at tens of thousands of transactions per second. So anyways, yeah.
Oh,
Sure.
so this high level and low level designs are specific documents like 6 pages also, or they are in some different format?
Generally 6 pages, yeah. They follow a bit of a different format. I don't think I covered it, but pretty much, you're going to have like an overview of the architecture. So there's more pictures in these than normal 6-page documents, but there's usually quite a bit of written narrative as well.
If you change like what you decided like on the later pages, do you go back and update those pages?
Throughout the life of a project we do, we'll keep those documents updated.
And
quite
then
often
it's done. Are they stored somewhere traceable, like in Wiki?
Yeah, so we have a wiki that the whole company uses, and it's all public access, like everybody inside the company can access it. And then we have like work docs which some people use, and then Quip is the other one. Quip is our internal like Google Docs basically. And then a lot of stuff lives there. Another question? Yep.
Yeah, you mentioned intake tests, canary tests, and monitoring. Can you give me an example of how you might implement each one of those? Like what it would look like?
Yeah. So I mean, think of the pyramid, right? A unit test is just like I can execute that independent of any other service. My intake test is when I'm going to start talking to databases, talking to other services. So every team has an alpha environment that's just for them for development purposes. And then we all run a beta environment. So then within Identity Center, our beta talks to all the other betas that we rely on, and they talk to us, sort of thing. And that's our first test at kind of making sure that like the call that I wrote to call the portal service actually gets back the parameters that I thought it would, that sort of thing. Canaries are effectively the same thing. They're intake tests that run on a regular cadence. So usually we try to write alarms that fire within 3 minutes of detecting a problem. So we run our canaries every 10 to 30 seconds. And they exercise the same code paths as our intake tests do. Make sure that all of our dependencies are healthy, our service is still responding the way it should. That's that type of thing. So the intake tests protect when you deploy. We deploy the software, we run the intake test, make sure everything's good, and then the canaries is continuous validation. The alarms and monitors. So we publish metrics for absolutely everything. Latency, number of requests, number of 400 responses, 500 responses. And then we have thresholds defined for every one of those, after which point we'll page an engineer. And so if our latency goes up, our P99 latency goes up more than a few milliseconds, there's going to be an engineer working on it within 15 minutes.
Okay, so these environments, your alpha and your beta environment, are continually like working with each other and running tests against each other, and then you're getting alarms. And so somebody in some other environment pushes some code that breaks your alpha version, you figure it out pretty quickly.
Yeah. So I mean, the whole idea is so that like we know if our service is unhealthy, and then it just happens that quite often it's unhealthy because of somebody else, right? So yeah.
Excuse me, I have a question. How do you guys manage historic feature flags?
We remove them. I mean, is that your question? Like, sorry, I'm not sure I understand.
So I'm trying to understand if you guys constantly use feature flags and techniques like that, you would probably incur certain debt in all this redundant code after all the feature go live.
Yeah, we do, for sure. And there's a lot of feature flags that are no longer needed because they're enabled in every environment. There's a lot of like code paths that don't get exercised anymore because we turn something on or off. That is one of those things that every team says we're going to do like right after we go GA, and then you never get around to it. It just gets deprioritized. In my experience, the only way that stuff gets fixed is the next time you're adding a feature flag, someone's going to go, oh, that's been on for like 2 years. We should probably go rip that out. And then you'll get a code review out that, someone's removing a bunch of feature flags. So there isn't a great process, but it also generally doesn't cause a lot of problems, right? If the feature flag's on, you're executing that code path always. And, the cognitive overhead of that is not huge. So.
Okay, good to know. Thanks.
Cool. Okay, so you did some high-level design, low-level design, you wrote some code. Now it's time to actually ship it to customers. And maybe you've done some private betas and so on at this point, but now we get into operational readiness review. And every team at Amazon right now is doing this as we prepare for reInvent. We're wrapping up our ORRs. An ORR is a big checklist. It's not a 6-page document. It's about 120 questions. Some organizations have more or less questions, depending. But about 120 questions of all of the kind of best practices that we haven't been able to codify into frameworks and actual mechanisms. So this is the opportunity to go and review everything from, have you worked with product management to define SLAs for your service? Have you ran a load test? Have you done a game day where you take down parts of it and see how it reacts? Have all your engineers taken their tier 1 resolver training, which is what you need to go on call? Things like this. It even goes down to like details, like if there's been recent security campaigns that haven't been broadly adopted, they'll have like a question that says, have you turned on this feature flag or whatever, right? So it's a little bit of everything, but this is kind of our last chance to pause if we find anything wrong, and really introspect and make sure that we're not shipping software that's going to result in people staying up overnight every night. Yeah.
Is it set up minimum 120 questions or?
I think there's about like 85 kind of standard questions, and then most teams add like ones that are specific to their service. So 120, I think, is about what our organization's at right now. So this can take anywhere from 10 days to 10 months, depending on what you're shipping. I've been working on our ORR for our reInvent launch since I think like May or something like that. It happens sort of at the same time as development, and then you get sign off at some point, because it also influences what you have to build, right? If you know that you have to run a load test, you might start building that early, running a few kind of lower TPS tests, seeing where it falls over, running a few higher ones, talking your dependencies, that kind of thing. Right. Okay. Finally, we got to the Agile part. So, I mean, our kind of like weekly or bi-weekly cadence, most teams run a 2-week sprint, in my experience, is very vanilla, very standard. Sprint planning on Mondays. We estimate stories. Most teams do story points. Some people do t-shirt sizes. This can get really tough with software engineers. I don't know if you guys know that. When I first joined the Amazon MQ team, the story pointing was always all over the map. We never got estimates that lined up. And so then we'd kind of just talk, and then eventually someone would go, can we just make this a 3? And we'd go with a 3. So I tried during one retrospect that I'm skipping to the end to get everybody kind of on board and understand that, like, okay, we're estimating, but it's like an aggregate of kind of like complexity, unknowns, effort, and everyone's like, okay, that makes sense. And then on Monday, one of my engineers showed up and he said, hey, I spent the weekend building a machine learning model. You give it those 3 inputs on a scale of 1 to 10, effort, complexity, and unknowns, and it spits out the story points. And the team was so excited to use this. They're like, great, we'll never have to have a discussion again. This is amazing. So varying levels of success with that, but we still tried. So we have daily scrums. Most teams have daily scrums, I'd say. And then story refinement, where you groom your backlog. You make sure you know what you're pulling next sprint. We do demos. Most teams don't really have access to a customer to demo to. So they'll demo to product managers or senior leaders in the org who are kind of a bit removed from the day-to-day. Sometimes this is just a code walkthrough, like here's what I built. Sometimes it's calling an API from the command line, and sometimes it's here's the big feature we finally can show you. And then we retrospect. Again, varying levels of success. Most teams try to take action items, and often they're forgotten by Monday. So we retrospect on that sometimes too. Continuous improvement. So this is built into a lot of the things that we do, but in particular, our operations, right? The health of our services is basically #1 priority. Security is pretty much the only thing that trumps that. And we spend at least 3 days a week on it. Mondays, the 2-piece team does a team ops review. We review our dashboards with KPIs, we review high severity tickets, and we talk about anything that might be paging people more than it should, that type of thing. We use this to prioritize ops improvements. We've always got most teams run a primary and secondary on call. The primary is the one who gets paged. Secondary is usually the one who picks up the slack and fixes these ops issues. And then we kind of roll this up. So then we do it at the org level. So AWS Identity has an ops review. We review COEs, which I'll get into a bit. And then we do a dashboard review on a rotation. We talk about highlights and lowlights, from teams, that kind of thing. And then we do it at the AWS level. So 125,000 people are invited to this meeting. Probably only about 4,000 show up, but it's still gigantic. Only a handful participate. The rest are just spectators. But this is where our most senior technical people, so distinguished engineers, senior principal engineers, things like that, they review large scale events that impacted many services, that took down customers, that type of thing. And the goal is always to get to a fully rooted cause, understand how it failed, and of course, how to prevent it next time. The mechanism for that is COEs, correction of errors. We love our documents, so it's another 6-page or so document. This one is a pretty tight template that you have to answer. Things like, how did you detect it? How fast did you detect it? How could you do it in half the time next time? And then we do a 5 whys. Very standard, starting from here was the impact all the way to, this line of code caused, some retry storm, and that's what took everything down. These we talk about blameless reviews. So you never name names, you never name customers, but you want the root cause, right? That's the goal. COEs often come with action items, and those will trump everything but an S-team goal. So this is, again, just kind of a mechanism for prioritizing and responding to changing environments. And then the top-down stuff comes in as campaigns, we call them. So someone will run a campaign forcing every team to abandon TLS 1.0 and 1.1, and they'll give you a due date. And if you don't hit that due date, they'll talk to your VP and he'll come and talk to you. I was going to say yell, but that usually doesn't happen. So anything top down, that'll come in the form of campaigns with a due date, and you just have to hit that. Okay, shifting gears again. So any questions on the last bit there? Okay. Oh.
How's the AWS internal practices are different compared to the standard global practice when it comes to Agile or Scrum practices? How it differ, at what extent it differ, or it correlates with the standard organizational practice?
I think that's a really tough question to answer. I think that Amazon has been doing things a certain way for a long time, and it changes and evolves. But I think if you came into Amazon and said, "Hey, let's implement less," everyone would be like, "No, you're crazy. We don't do that at Amazon." So I've never had conversations at Amazon about what is the industry doing, like what framework should we be using for this kind of stuff. So I think it's hard to compare because it's just, these are the things that the teams do and how we work. And it's not really meant to be influenced by the outside, if you will. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of my take. Go ahead.
Next questions. So how difficult for anyone who is joining AWS, maybe some experienced guy, or to adapt the new, frameworks, or I would say AWS sort of frameworks? How difficult that part is?
I think it depends. If you're joining as a software developer, it's probably pretty easy because your day-to-day is going to be very familiar, right? Daily stand-ups and so on. If you're joining as a more senior engineer, then you get plugged into all these different processes and you have to adapt. I joined as a manager. My first 6 months were like a fire hose. It's so much learning. They love their acronyms. So I'd sit in a meeting and go, I didn't understand 70% of what you just said, that kind of thing. There's a lot of learning about just the cadence of the business and when you write these documents and who you have to review them with and who needs to have input in it and so on. So yeah, it's peculiar. Cool. Okay. So business reviews. How do you know that things are going well? You have to, talk about it, review it. Again, everything kind of rolls up. So these things kind of get broader in audience and more senior. We have weekly program reviews. So pretty much every project will either have a dedicated program review or like a combined one where we talk about a couple of them. The project I'm working on right now, we have an internal one for AWS identity, and then we have one with all the partner teams we're working with. We have about 7 other AWS services that are integrating with our new feature for reInvent. So we have 2 of those a week. These are going to be things like just goal status, you red, yellow, green. What's your date? Has it changed? And then risks and open items. And then you just keep updating that every week. If you happen to own an AWS or S-team goal, you must write bi-weekly updates in a tool called Kingpin. Reports are generated and go out to the stakeholders who sponsored those every 2 weeks. And it's kind of like law, you have to do this. If you don't do it, some VP is going to get pretty angry and come talk to you about it. These updates are usually very short, 1 to 5 sentences sort of thing. And it's really meant to indicate just the health of it. Have you learned anything new? Has your day changed? Are you on track? So they're pretty easy, right? And then we do monthly business reviews, and these are 6-page documents, of course, because we love those. And this talks about the team's goals, hits or misses. This could be things like a customer tried to onboard and use our service. They wasted 6 months and they abandoned it, and so our SAs are mad at us. And it could be, hey, we had this huge revenue spike because this new customer onboarded or whatever, right? But this is just the health of the team, of the service, reviewing financials, reviewing operations, all that kind of stuff. And then quarterly, that rolls up to the org. So the AWS identity, in my case, they write a 6-page document talking about the org level health and so on. And then S-team goal reviews. So the S-team meets monthly to review these goals. Across Amazon, there ends up being, I think last year there was like 280 of them. So they don't review everyone every month, obviously, but it's a rotation and you get reviewed a couple times a year. And you have to go to Seattle and defend your goal there, sort of thing. So that's how we do business reviews, I guess. This is a quote from Jeff Bezos. Feel free to read it. But the idea is we're always looking for mechanisms as opposed to best intentions. Right? If something goes wrong and you say to somebody, hey, do better, that's the best intention because they were trying to do good already. So we build mechanisms like our 3-year plans and OP1s, like our ORRs and COEs and so on. But they're built in at many layers. So we have mechanisms like AppSec reviews that fits into the ORR. We have principal engineer reviews. These people aren't just technical focused. We have principal engineers who have been in the industry for 25 years building X that they work on. And so they know everything. So they review PRFAQs, they review high-level designs, ORRs. You can go to office hours with Ps and just talk about, hey, I've got this thing that I think I need to solve. Do I need to solve it? Anything like that. And then we have bar raisers. So bar raisers are experts in their fields. So crypto is one example of cryptography. If you're changing or using a new cryptographic algorithm, you must go to the bar raisers and have it approved. You're not allowed to write anything to do with crypto by yourself. It's just not allowed. Same thing with APIs. You can't ship a new API to the public without going through the crypto PR. If you think about it, we have probably tens of thousands of distinct endpoints that serve traffic. And if everybody just built their own shape and their own response times and their own, et cetera, it would be a really, really bad customer experience. So that group basically proves, are you using our standard verbs? It's, describe resource instead of get resource, these types of things. And then the latest one, the newest one, is a multi-region. So Amazon has always operated in regions. So IAD, PDX, these are collections of data centers that are isolated from the other ones. And you never cross that boundary until a couple years ago. We had a big outage with Kinesis that took down IAD, or US East 1, our primary region, impacted tens of thousands of customers. And then all of a sudden customers went, hey, we really need multi-region stuff. And we said, okay, fine, we'll do multi-region. But we're gonna have bar raisers. So we make sure we don't screw things up. So okay, so back to ChatGPT's list. I won't go through it, but I did it with my wife last night when I was practicing. Check. But I think that the mechanisms and the processes that we cover, it's obviously a huge company and there's a lot of things, a lot of bureaucracy before our team gets to do some work. But I think it's a pretty damn good example of Agile at scale. Covers most of these boxes. Some of them are kind of weak. Agile tools and technologies. We have homegrown solutions that got built 20 years ago that we're still using. So I can't produce reports for sprints. I don't have a burn down chart. I just get to look at you did this many stories this sprint, that type of thing. But a lot of the stuff about iterative development, continuous feedback, user centricity, I think we do pretty well. So with that, that's the end of my presentation. So I'll open it up for questions, comments. Oh,
Question.
well,
What's exactly the difference between alpha and beta? I haven't paid as much attention as I should.
alpha is just for the team that owns that environment. So when I ship my code to alpha, it talks to other people's betas, but nobody talks to our alpha.
Oh,
So
okay.
I can break alpha.
betas. Okay, that was the when you mentioned it's your own. Okay, now I get it.
Yeah, so it's a development environment. There's no guarantee that it's stable or working or correct. So we'll often push code that might break, or we just want to see how it works or if it does work. But beta will only be promoted to if all the intake tests pass and the canaries are fine for 30 minutes. If that happens, then it's automatically promoted to beta. And then other teams are relying on beta, so there is an expectation that it's stable, right?
Okay, yeah.
Cool.
Your day-to-day processes, are you doing much pairing or like peer review close on? How are you interacting and collaborating in a way to kind of help, keep quality up and make sure that everything's getting checked over?
Very little pairing. I mean, I work remote, so it's hard to do remote. But even in person, there's very little pairing. I actually really enjoy pairing. I think it's super valuable for mentoring and things like that. It's just not built into the culture. People are kind of hesitant to start. Code reviews are mandatory. That's the organization-wide thing. Most teams actually go above and say we want 2 code reviewers. And the expectation there is that you go through every line of code and you're putting your stamp on it so that you say yes, this is correct. There's actually a way to check how many revisions per code review you've had. So if I get feedback, I have to go make a change. I publish another revision and so on. Out of the team of 10 engineers that I work with, I'm the only senior engineer and I have the worst revision per review count at 1.6 or something like that. So people will often, it's everything from nitpicking, hey, this variable is named incorrectly, to, hey, you could architect this differently, or you could use this other thing or whatever. But yeah, they're very thorough. And then in terms of quality, I mean, there's just table stakes in terms of unit test and intake test coverage. You won't get a code review approved if you don't have those things. Canaries and monitors will defer till later in the project, sort of thing. But yeah, every line of code that goes in, it has to have automated tests because it goes to production, right? Yeah.
So code reviews, do you have another teams that are not working on your product to review your code, or you only review your own stuff?
Just your team. Yeah, the team owns it, right?
Totally isolated from others.
Yeah, it is. I mean, so if you think about the incentive, if I send my code review off to another team and I know that I'm blocked and a customer's waiting for it, they don't care. They got their own stuff to worry about, right? But someone on my team is probably facing the same problem. Someone on my team also has to support that code when it goes to production, right? So they're incentivized automatically to go, oh no, this is an inefficient way. You could do this faster, and it's not going to increase latency. So I think there's benefit. There's probably some loss in just shared knowledge by not doing cross-team code reviews. But I find it personally really tough to review code that I don't have context on, right? A lot of what you're reviewing is just did you implement the business requirements properly? Did you understand the architectural patterns that we kind of have established? That sort of thing. Oh, you raise your hand first. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. So how do you? Yeah.
It's okay. It's okay.
How do you balance between kind of feature work or tech debt, or for example, when you review your dashboards or KPIs or stuff like that, you see there are some issues, but it feels like maybe those are not necessarily the thing that you have committed to do for the next 18 months.
Yeah.
How do you balance the work there? So basically both sides are happy.
So very idealistically, I guess we could say. So when you write your OP1 doc, one of the things that you write is a table of the projects, right, stack ranked, with headcount assigned. And usually the very first item on that table is KTLO, keep the lights on. And so you allocate just a fixed number of people to operate in the service. That doesn't mean that the same 4 people are going to run your service all year, but it usually means that we have 2 people on call, one who's primary responding to all the tickets, The secondary is the one who's kind of like trailing behind them, fixing the little ops things, looking at the dashboard, fixing things that we find there, working on campaigns if they're small enough, that type of thing. So there's built-in Slack that way that we always have at least 2 people. Most teams do. And then most teams try to allocate another 1 or 2 headcount to ops improvements. And that bucket is usually left just kind of to the team. Like it's just a blank check to go do things you need to do that you need to do. So an example is my service. We run 10 hosts in production sort of thing in most of the regions. So these are just CC2 instances running our code, load balancer in front of it. And we want to move to a cellular architecture where we have basically like 2 distinct clusters that we ship software to at different times to reduce blast radius, right? So if I ship a bug, I'm going to ship it to 50% of our customers first, and then the other 50% later, right? That's not something that's easy to justify from a business perspective, unless you've had an outage that this really could have helped. In our case, we're just saying, hey, we're growing fast and this is getting scary, so we want to do this. So that's something we'll put in that operational excellence bucket. Yeah. Go ahead. Before someone else jumps in.
We have a question online from Don.
We'll come back. He's been waiting for a bit. Sorry. One more.
I'm curious, like, so the whole development life cycle, does Amazon uses the whole tool set you provide to customers inside, like code deploy, all that stuff, or do you guys use again like GitLab or Circle CI or all those tools? Like,
it depends. So I just learned of a team yesterday that uses Jenkins, and I was shocked. I was like, I didn't know we had any Jenkins still. So we have 2 classifications. We have native AWS services. These are teams that build on top of AWS. So they use Lambda and EC2 and API Gateway and all the things you do. And then we have our, I don't even know what we call them, just our classic services, I guess. These teams might even deploy to bare metal servers. They might like buy servers and install them when we deploy to a new region. So an example would be SQS. They actually go and provision servers, install them in racks, and install their software on them, right? Because it's one of the first services that's spun up in any region. Everything depends on it. So if they have AWS dependencies, then if Lambda goes down and that takes SQS with it, that's problematic, right? So foundational services like that, they don't build on anything public. So we have our own internal tools that are similar. So we have internal pipelines tools like Code Deploy. We have Apollo, which is sort of like an EKS offering, things like this. So we have all these tools. And then at some point, somebody says, hey, that'd be great if we could offer that to the public. And that's usually how those services come to be.
and is it, so do you guys strictly use CloudWatch, or you have, again, Datadog or Dynatrace or?
I don't know anybody using external monitoring service or telemetry service. Everyone uses CloudWatch. We have an internal system called PMET for the foundational services. CloudWatch uses the same data store as PMET, but they're isolated, like they just run their own stacks. So yeah, there's a lot of dog food. Yeah. Okay.
There's CloudWatch.
I don't know. CloudWatch in other regions, I assume. That's what I guess. Yeah. Dawn, online?
Question is about your time to market. So when you were going through your dev process and your sprints, how long does that actually take for you to deliver to actual customers, even in a gated way? Do you deliver every couple of sprints to get feedback, or you just keep sprinting through the development until you're ready through your, I think you call it the ORR?
Yeah.
And how long realistically does that often take? Are you getting something out every month, or is it dependent on the product, how long that takes to get your feedback loop from customers?
Yeah, it totally depends. If you have a mature, stable product that you're adding a feature to, that could be as short as a month sort of thing. Because there is, still a pretty high bar in terms of AppSec review or even for small features. That can take time. So I think probably the shortest delivery I've seen is about a month. If you're building a new service or a major feature, other than the private betas and so on, those get shipped at the end, right? We turn on a feature flag and we post a what's new, and now it's live and it's public and people can use it. the problem with shipping parts of a feature incrementally is that AWS is so big that things like customers just come organically. Amazon MQ, when I joined, was a small service, maybe 500 customers. And when I left, we had like over 20,000 customers. We managed something like 120,000 EC2 instances. And there's no advertising, right? Like people use AWS, they want everything in AWS. So as soon as you make a feature live, customers are touching it like within hours. As soon as we post our what's new, we've got 100 customers, right? Just kicking the tires. So there's no good way to like ship something bad and react quickly, right? Especially when you gotta go like an RR and things like that.
That's what I wondered, just the nature of what you do and the size of your customer base. I really wondered how you would pull that off and how that fit to make sure you didn't end up with upset customers as well. So thanks.
Now, I guess, I mean, the one exception or caveat I'll give to that is things like bug fixes. Bug fixes go straight to production all the time, you know, and you use your judgment to say whether or not you need AppSec or things like that. We have an emergency deploy process that overrides big times and gets things through our pipelines faster. So, you know, we can have a bug fix out to all our customers within a week, sort of thing, if we need to.
And when you're in the middle of your sprint, if you have finished part of what you're building and it's ready to go through some of those other protocols, like you want to bake something, but you're not done your sprint, are you still pushing it out so that it can start that process while you continue on?
Yeah, as soon as your code is approved, as soon as you have your code review, it's automatically put into alpha. Those tests run automatic, like everything's automated. But as soon as it's approved, there's no more humans, right? It's an alpha, test pass, canaries pass, it gets promoted to beta. Test pass, canaries pass, gets promoted to the first prod region. We have, so I think today, something like 26 or 29 regions. And of course, we don't want to break all regions at once. So we start small, deploy to a small region, wait 12 hours, deploy to a big region, wait 2 hours, and then we start kind of ramping up. So then we'll do 3 regions, 6 regions, and so on with 2 hours of bake time. But we're always running the tests in every region. We're always baking every region. And that's just every line of code that we write automatically goes to that process.
Nice. And then my last question is just tying back to your PR FAQ. So once you get it out the door, got some people kicking the tires, are you starting to assess it against your original PR FAQ and then growing from there? Is that typically how you're working, or do you have a set period of time? You know, we'd like to have a month to see what sort of feedback we get, or we're just going to start collecting it right away and see what we can do with it.
Like collecting feedback and metrics, that kind of thing?
Yeah, whatever kind of metrics. I'm sure you're not, having your 20,000 customers providing you feedback, but just some kind of information back on how customers are responding to what you've released. Do you start that right away or give it a period of time?
I mean, again, it depends on the size. If it's a big product, a big feature, we're working with customers at the launch time, right? So we probably have customers lined up either as a private beta and they're already using it before it goes live, or we're talking to them every day as they start implementing and using it. In terms of metrics, I mean, we're immediately monitoring, usage, throughput, latency, errors, etc. All of that gets reviewed very closely at the start of a product launch. And it probably is just the form of like a product manager or a manager of the team reviewing dashboards or reports every day. And I think that kind of like slows down over time as you focus on other features. But yeah, I think the first little bit there's definitely very close watch on features.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Have you ever encountered like a project or a problem or a task that would be more than what a 2-pizza team can handle? And if so, how do you manage that?
The project that I'm working on right now spans, like I said, I think 8 AWS services. And we've got multiple teams from all those services working on this project. it's really difficult. But a lot of it comes down to the high level designs at the start, basically saying like, here's what we need from these different teams. And then those teams go away and they build more high level designs that say, here's how that fits into our existing domain boundaries. And that's probably the shape of like a microservice, right? That owns that specific business logic. And then you've got your own, right? That's a 2-pizza team owns a service. If it happens that you have more work than that team who owns that service can do, we have what's called an away team model. And I hate it, and it's the worst, and it always has problems. And we did this a bunch during this project, and we had a lot of problems. But basically, this is where like you say, hey, I've got this amount of work. It's going to take me 4 years. And someone says, that's not good enough. We got to do it faster. So then they say, okay, I'll give you 5 engineers and they'll come work with you. So they effectively join your team, but they don't go on call and they don't stay with you. And so like, you know, it works and we get software shipped faster in theory. I'm sure there's like some PhD written on how that limits it at a certain point. But I mean, that's the model. If you can't, you know, if the service can't handle that amount of work in the time that you need, you would either split the service, right, and write a new service, or you donate people and try to go faster.
So when you have like these multiple teams now, how do you handle like the lines of communication or manage Scrum or Agile between all these different 2-pizza teams now?
We generally don't. We write APIs. And so the contract is the API model. Teams don't integrate at the database layer or anything like that, right? There's no shared anything. They just make. So that, you know, that's the contract or the negotiation that happens is what APIs do I need? When do I need them by? And are they working well? And so on. And then, you know, that's our business reviews, right? So our weekly program reviews, that's where we might discuss those types of things, like which low-level design needs to get done to unblock a certain team, things like that. Yeah. Oh, Erica has raised her hand.
Oh, hi.
Erica?
Yes, sorry. This is Erica. Thanks for taking my comment. So I have a situation in and I would like to see if you have encountered something like this. Is if I'm in a project where we have a combination of work with internal people, and then we have 3 consultants, and 1 consultant is located partially local in Canada and then offshore. And then you had people that some follow the Agile process, Scrum, but other ones don't. Have you encountered a situation like that where you still had to send reports to, you know, all the right steering committee members and all these stakeholders, but you had different approach that every group does to manage their work? Have you encountered something like that, and how did you resolve that?
I don't know about the specific situation that you're talking about, but you know, when we say 2-pizza teams, like teams do things their own way. Like I said, I discovered yesterday a team using a totally different technology than others do. So most teams have a either product or project manager on the team, and they're really the ones who kind of wrangle the team level reports and things like that. For large programs that span teams, we'll have a program manager defined, and that's the person who owns like the reporting across teams. And I don't know if I can speak to the specifics of, you know, how that gets done. I know it can be really tough, just judging from our program manager that I work with, having to get updates from everybody, put them into the same consistent format, make sure they know that the meetings are on Mondays, that kind of thing. So I don't have a great answer for you, but I think you need 1 person responsible for it is the only thing I would say.
That sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll wrap up for there. I'm sure Lucas will be around for a few minutes if there's more questions in the room. But thank you everyone for coming out. Thank you, Lucas, for sharing with us. We have One of a kind, special gift for you from Calgary Agile.
Awesome.
There's maybe 50 of a kind, but you know.
Okay.
Thank you so much. That was super interesting and really appreciated you sharing that with us.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thing in December for Calgary Agile, but we're hitting the new year with a lot of good stuff. So it's action packed. So January 11th, we have someone joining us remotely. Her name's Sarah Youssef, and she's going to be talking about team performance. And then also in January, on the 25th, we're going to be hosting a session where Jill Langer is going to come in and teach us how to do some visual facilitation. And so for that session, you do have to register ahead of time, and there's a cost of $35 for her time as well. So check those out on Meetup, and hopefully we'll see you all at those. But otherwise, thanks for joining us tonight, and we'll wrap up there. And Dan has also shared the feedback. What gets over here? The QR code for feedback. So please scan that and give us some feedback on how your experience was with us in the session tonight. So thank you, everyone.
Erica, you still have your hand raised. Did you still have a question? Thanks, everybody. Oh, Martin's got a question.
Hi, Lucas. Thanks for your presentation, by the way. Earlier you'd mentioned that the code review process is mandatory. Was that also from the point of view of reviewers, as in you try to get everyone on the team involved in code reviews at some point, like maybe on a rotational basis or something like that? I'm just curious what the process looks like.
So, I mean, the way my team runs it today is we require 2 reviewers, and we always ask that you assign someone who has context on what you're working on. So whether they've like touched that code or they reviewed your design or whatever, someone who has context. And then the second reviewer is usually anyone on the team. We never run like a rotation, anything like that. Like it's an expectation that everybody's reviewing code. And there's a bit of like gamification to it, right? Like if you think of like BitTorrent, right? Seeders and leechers, maybe it's a bad example, but if you never review other people's code, they're not likely to go and review your code. So, you know, it's just good practice to review other people's code. Even our like junior engineers straight out of school, I encourage them to review my code and to leave comments or questions. And a lot of it comes down to like reading code is a skill of itself. You're going to read way more code than you ever write. And you're going to learn a ton if you read a ton of code reviews. So I, personally, if I'm mentoring somebody, I just encourage them to do it so they learn about our system and learn about how people on our team write code. But yeah, I've never really encountered a scenario where anybody, is opposed to it or doesn't do code reviews, that sort of thing. Not at Amazon. I have at other companies.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
I have another question, Dawn.
Sure, go for it.
I really liked when you were at the front of at the beginning of your presentation, when you were talking about some of that upfront goal, like the various goal planning. I just was curious if there's any chance you could show the 3-year slide again. I wasn't writing fast enough.
Yeah.
But I really liked how that was structured. As I think having those goals is really helpful for any team. So
I've left the Zoom. Can I maybe I think I'll probably email the presentation to the organizers, and then maybe they can send it out.
Sure, that sounds good.
On our meetup group, so yeah, if you do that, we'll get it out for you.
Sounds good.
Thank you. I tried to write fast, but I just couldn't write fast enough.
No worries.
Yeah, we'll get
Thank
that.
you very much. It was great.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us, everybody. Thank you, Lucas. Thank you, organizers and sponsors. We'll see you all next time.
Okay, thanks, Dan.
Shall I leave on here?